Um, so we wanted to workshop a little bit after these new forms, right? We have a lot of questions, a lot of like best practices, and what are people doing? How are people handling different changes and stuff like that. So we had some requests from people asking us to do this, and so that is what we're doing today. So hopefully we'll do some actual role play and have some dialogues or scripts in our heads of how we might approach talking to different clients. I'm seeing my face in Union Park, and that is massive. How do I like zoom back? Can I like go like this a little bit? Woo! Sorry to all of you. It's a lot more damage than I want.
We're liking it.
we like it. All right. Fair. I mean, that's probably not legit, but fair enough. Okay. Raise a hands. You don't need to say anything. Anybody confused at all about how to handle, buyers or sellers or what to say? We got Daryl. Kelly's nodding. Okay. Well, good. So hopefully we'll talk about some of that. Wanted to tee this up with something from Brian Buffini, who's a favorite coach of a lot of ours. And so I'll go ahead and share my screen and cue up Mr. Buffini on the new way of working with buyers.
It's very important on your presentations with your buyers that you explain the new rules of real estate for buyers, okay? And that is, in order to show properties, they have to sign a buyer's agency agreement. Now, this is more challenging. And oh, by the way, a whole bunch of people are going to leave the real estate business over this. A lot of your amateurish Aunt Marys are not going to sit down and say, you need to sign a buyer's agency agreement with me. We need to pre-discuss my commissions and my service before I go show you houses. An awful lot of people are going to be too terrified to do that. And that's what this course is going to help any of you with. So this piece right here in your presentations, I'm going to work with you all the details with the listing agent to negotiate the best price. We'll have a written agreement that outlines the services and value I provide prior to turn homes. Compensation can no longer be listed on the MLS on a state-by-day basis, but can always, and has always been the case, negotiate in other ways, especially through concessions. Again, the same image in the presentation. Here's historically how real estate was done. And now here's the new day in real estate. It can no longer go through the MLS. It's going to go through the marketing plan of the listing agent. Now, in truth, the business is going to work pretty similarly to the way it always has. In truth. The dynamic is that sellers are going to basically offer commission or compensation to a buyer's agent through concessions. And why? Especially right now. The properties are sitting on the market. They need to compete. They need to compete. They need to get as many offers in as they can, or any offers at all. They need to make their listing as attractive as possible. Now, one thing I want to share with you is there is a little awkwardness now in talking to a buyer. Now, there's all kinds of details, and we'll get into that in a moment here. Can I do I have to, someone to tour an open house, do they have to sign an agreement? No, and we'll get into that in a moment. But the biggest thing I'm going to say to you, and I've watched this and I've heard of this, is that buyer's agents are now approaching their buyer, and it's like, dun, dun, dun. Here's the buyer's agency agreement. You need to sit down. You're visiting the proctologist. You need to make this giant commitment to me. We're getting married, and it's not even our first date. And that's just not the way it needs to be done, okay? Hey, there's some new rules of real estate. The game has changed. Here's what I do. Here's how I do it. We have to have an agreement in order to go look at homes. However, if you're not totally satisfied with this process, just so you know, we can cancel at any time. Okay? I want you to know that I want you to be as comfortable as possible, but in order for me to tour you through homes, we need to sign this buyer's agency agreement, and we're going to pre-decide up front. I'm going to show you everything I do. I'm going to show you what I charge, and I'm also going to let you how I think we'll get that paid, especially by asking for some concessions to cover those fees.
Awesome. Okay.
It's very important on your
things stand out to y'all in that. I had a couple takeaways, so maybe I'll just go ahead and share what I what I thought. One thing I thought is first, you have to have something in writing, right? This has always been the Utah state rule, right? It always has been. I think we've kind of fudged some rules there, right? We, did it at closing table. I know I did 10 years ago. That was part of my shtick, was like, I don't make you sign anything until the closing table. And that was clearly wrong. That was not the way it was supposed to do. That was not the way the law was written. And we've always needed to have agency in writing. We felt okay showing homes without having agency in writing, but it was not the way it was supposed to be done. So the way it's supposed to be done is to have that agency in writing. I don't know what Aunt Mary did to get, Buffini's brutal attacks there, but poor Aunt Mary. But this is not new, right? And and I was talking with Matt Barton just before this, and one thing he made this, he likened this to was when his wife Nancy came over here. She had never charged a transaction fee, shall we call it, right? She had never done that before, and for her it was this big monumental thing. I'm going to ask my clients for $300 extra on top of the commission, and that's going to be challenging to do. But Matt challenged her to do it on her next 3 appointments and just see what happens. No one pushed back. No one had any issues with signing that. And I think more often than not, the way in which we deliver the news is the way in which it'll be received. And so if we kind of build this up to be this really big life-changing thing, and it's going to be really different than what we've done in the past, and the clients are going to get kind of worried and anxious, and in reality, this is not different than what we've done in the state of Utah. And when I'm explaining something to the clients, I often say, yeah, there's been some changes on the national level, but here in Utah, they're not that big of a deal because we've done these things for decades, right? We've had really good buyer disclosure, buyer broker documentation for decades, and so there's not a whole lot, different. In fact, Buffini said that. He said, in truth, this is really similar to the way we've done it in the past. So I think one thing I take away here is, as we're explaining these forms, the bigger deal we kind of make these as changes to our clients, often will be how they're received. If we're kind of, just really direct and straightforward, and here's the changes, here how it is, then I think the clients will receive it in that manner as well. So I think that's a good takeaway and important. Okay. I was going to do sellers objections first, but let's go to buyers objections first. So I'm going to share my screen. So we went through and we thought of what might some objections to these changes be. And I'm going to ask Kelly to read the first objection here.
I've heard about some recent changes in real estate. I am confused about how all this works.
Yeah, has anybody heard that? Has anybody had those conversations yet? I mean, is this new enough where we're not having those conversations? Kelly, have you heard that?
Not yet.
Okay. How might you respond to that if someone were to have that as an objection? We kind of talked about that a minute ago, but how might you respond to all the changes as a concern from a buyer?
I think a quick explanation. Yes, there's been some changes made. Words have left me.
Yeah.
I think you need to figure out where they're coming from, what knowledge they have to start with, and then that will be a clue as to what you need to tell them.
I think that's great.
Dan?
Yeah.
I think Brian Buffini kind of hit it on the response that we give to some of these questions. One is a panic, of course, and the other is it's no big deal. I think it's a little early that probably we haven't had a lot of one-on-one conversations, but I've had a lot of people approach me just in passing and say, wow, what's happening to your business? I hear that no commissions are going to be paid anymore, and crazy things like that. In fact, Spencer comes into my office every morning and says, you hear what happened on the news today? And he said that some of the news channels are saying you don't have to pay buyer commissions anymore. So we're going to have to answer to some of those things that are being broadcast erroneously across the entire nation.
Yeah, I think that's right. You know, I mean, what is it, Trump or whomever? No news is bad news, right? And if we take this as an opportunity to talk about, you know, real estate, I was walking my dog just 2 nights ago and ran into a neighbor who's an attorney, and he, of course, asked about, you know, some of the changes, and it was a really easy transition to real estate and what they were looking for. And they legitimately brought up a house that was in the neighborhood that has these awesome views, and they're like, if that thing comes for sale, like, let us know. And by the way, we heard that they might be moving, and so I have an appointment to go knock on their door and see if they are moving. So these are conversations that, you know, can lead to business if we just take them on directly, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. We didn't do anything, right? But I think those are opportunities just to talk with people. Let's just go through the rest of these, you know, objections that have come up frequently. You know, someone might think, if I go directly to a seller's agent, can I save money on the purchase of a house? That's kind of no different, right? But that's an objection. Why do I need to sign a buyer broker agreement with you? We just met and it seems so formal, right? And we can go over that as well. Another objection is, I've brought homes before. I've never had to sign a buyer broker agreement. Why do I need that now? So, in working with buyers, you know, we're gonna, I think when we go and we talk about the new forms, and once we've kind of talked about some of these objections, and hopefully we've handled them, and maybe we can go through these a little bit and talk about why we need to do it. One, you know, go directly to the seller's agent. Well, that's nothing new. We've had that as an objection forever, right? That's always been there from, you know, that's always been there. So I don't know if there's anything about this recent settlement that would be different. One thing that's interesting is, you know, when we go over to the seller side of things, is can a seller's agent actually represent a buyer? Do they have permission to get commission on that? And are they even allowed to? So there's some interesting aspects there of whether or not there'll be more buyer agents or less buyer agents, you know, as a result of, you know, these changes. Two is, why do I need to sign a buyer broker agreement with you? We just met and it seems so formal. As we talked about, you know, the way we deliver the message is going to maybe make it more formal or less formal. And we also have complete the ability to make these things, you know, exclusive to one house, to one property, to you know, for a period of time, right? And so we can step into an agreement that lasts for days or weeks or, you know, months, as we might prefer, but we can make them a little less intimidating for people. Just, you know, like Don said, let's talk to them, talk through the concern of why they might not want to sign something, and see if there is a middle point where we can have something in writing that we are required to have. The last thing is, I've bought homes before. I've never had to sign a broker agreement. Why do I need that now? Well, the real answer is you probably always needed to have one, and that we've been loose with our documents. And I'm a professional and I follow the law, and we'll have one now. And this is kind of akin to the same, you know, objection we may have just went over of, you know, what's the problem? Why can't you sign an objection or an agreement today? And then go over that. So those are some objections you might be seeing. You know, let us know if there's anything else. Is anybody else, before I guess we move on, anybody else seeing any objections yet as to buyers working with a buyer's agent or signing an agreement?
Hey, Dan, I've got a question.
Yeah, I haven't done a new one, so this is good.
I've read some conversations in some forums about how we can't actually use the terminology that it's a law because it's only an NAR rule. Is that thinking something we should pay attention to? Are we a ways away before the DRE, you know, would take that step to say, you know, that it's a law? Because all of these things are really NAR rules.
My response to this is, and someone can correct me, but my response is this: is our license, which is given to us by the state, requires us to have disclosure in writing. And so,
Right. But the way we've always done it was once, you know, agency was established, way before an offer, of course, but the specificity of before we tour a property. I mean, we can downplay the difference, right? So that we don't get overwhelmed and freaked out and all that, but it's different. We can just accept it and embrace it. It is different. The specificity of that requirement.
is it, Haley? It's always been a requirement to have a buyer agency in writing. We've traditionally done it before an offer, but if you look at what the DRE has said, we haven't really been, they haven't gone after people for doing this really that much, but we're supposed to have it before we talk about price.
Well, if you even if you read what they just put out in the last division letter that Matt went after her about, right? It was not as specific as what this new NAR rule is, right?
And she was wrong, and Matt was right. Unfortunately, I prefer when Matt's wrong because it's funny to me, but Matt unfortunately was right.
Well, we can argue that point, but you know, regardless, in practicality, for 25 years, 35 years, however long, you know, we've all been doing this, the specificity of that rule has not been a major thing for any 100%, of us.
Right? It is definitely more on the table today and clear to us that agencies got to be in writing prior to doing anything. Kelly.
Right. So what I wrote down and what I think would be best to say is as a professional, I'm taking the proper steps. Instead of saying it's a law, it's a legal issue. I think just you need to downplay it just a little bit, but there's some changes that have been made and we're taking the proper steps.
So Janelle and I, we work together a lot, and I was talking with a potential buyer, and I asked if this buyer had an agent, and he said, well, I kind of have someone. And then he literally put in parentheses, kind of. So what does that mean? And he goes, well, I haven't signed anything with her. They haven't shown me a property yet. They had, you know, blah, 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 blah. And she's not super responsive. And so I took it as an opportunity to differentiate us from them and say, like, hey, we're the pros. Like, we are supposed to have agency in writing. And he was interested in one of my listings. We're supposed to have agency in writing. I'd be happy to make it exclusive to this one property. But this is the new rule. I'm not sure if you've heard these changes, but this is the new rule, and this is how we operate. And so I used it as an opportunity to say, like, hey, we're pros. The other person you worked with isn't. And so some of the frustrations you've had with them, you're not going to have with us. And so I use it as an opportunity to differentiate rather than like make it a big deal that like, oh, you haven't signed a form. I was like, oh, that agent sucks. You know, you should be working with us.
I would love if we could say it's a law. I love that. I mean, it just puts full weight and credibility, and I can see, but I just hope the division will come out and clarify their statements or whatever so that we can kind of unite around this and have it be more than it's been. So it's not just
say rule, if that helps, right?
Huh?
Say rule, and that makes it seem like a little bit more.
I'd rather be able to say law. I'd rather be able to, but I don't know. I just feel like we're gray still.
Well, I was just going to say I mean, since we can't say that it's law, what if we just say that these are just the new rules and actually even using the word regulation, because that's what they're doing is they're regulating us. They're trying to get us all, you know, doing the same thing. So that's probably going to be my terminology. These are new rules and regulations, rather than saying that it's a law. I mean, I'm with Haley that I think that would be awesome to say it that way. Just say, hey, I have to do this legally. But if we just say these are the new rules and regulations, that's the terminology that I'm planning on using.
I like it. Okay. So how is it different, right? We've spent last week, Matt went around and talked to everybody about the new EBBA. What really is different about it? I looked at a couple of different things. There's really not a whole lot. The first two sections look different, right? But at the end of the day, they're not all that different. The first section, to me, it just rearranges the EBBA, right? It rearranges the way it looks and kind of outlines it. So for us, it looks intimidating. For a buyer, it's the first time they've ever seen these things, right? So it's not that big of a deal. Section 1.2 talks about, properties in different locations, right? And it says located only within or located only at, right? And that's how you would say, well, if a buyer only wanted to see, wanted you to represent them in Davis County, you would write Davis County there. Pro tip, right? If you can, let's make that say all of Utah, right? Then you're their agent wherever you can be, right? That would be awesome. Another pro tip, if they say they have an EBBA with someone else and you're talking with them about showing homes and, for whatever reason, their buyer agent isn't fulfilling all their needs and they're talking with you, ask them to send you a copy of their EBBA. There's a chance where they might be only confined to a certain area or a certain property, and they may be able to see properties with you in your location. And so if they've signed one, ask to see it, to see exactly how it's written and where, if it is confined to a certain region, and you might be able to work with them in your area. And then also lastly is there is, and I probably should have brought these forms up, but there is a unless checked below section here, right? Janelle and Matt often talks about being in a grievance committee recently, and that was me. And so we had a buyer who told us that they did not have an agent and that they went months and months without any interaction with their other agent. And they even showed us a check that they had paid this other agent to go away and to get out of an agreement with them. Unbeknownst to them, because this other agent was terrible with documents, is they only canceled a listing. They didn't cancel a buyer broker. So they thought they were out. They weren't out. But one section that's really important here is they are representing if they leave this unchecked or unless checked below, right? So unless they do declare that they have other agency with someone else, they're representing they don't have agency. And when you do go in front of the grievance committee, that matters, right? The public thought they weren't under contract. The other agent didn't do a good enough job to explain that they were under contract. And the grievance committee found in our favor. And so that's something that I think really important as we go through these, is that the client, unless they check below there, they are signing that they aren't in contract with someone else. Dom. Oh, you unmuted. I thought you had something to say.
Well, I was going to say something, and then I'll still say it.
Okay.
Are you really representing your buyer if you put in all of Utah?
Are you?
I don't know. If somebody wants to go see a house in Blanding, I am not going to Blanding to show them a house.
Then you're not. I've had buyers in Logan. I've had buyers in St. George, and I'm willing to go to both those places to represent those buyers. So you might not be willing to do that, but you might be for the right client. So that's a good point, is, make that correct if you are willing or not willing to represent them all over the state.
Yeah, but keep in mind, you're saying a buyer-broker agreement, not an agreement with you as an agent. So if you have that, we can pass it on to one of our other, offices or one of our other agents, because you already have the buyer-broker for the company.
I like that, Clint.
Hey, Dan.
Yeah.
I think the key to all of this is asking questions, and you've brought that up. The better our questions are, the better the investigation into what they want and what they're doing is going to lead us to asking the right questions about establishing our relationship with them, our agency. and we'll know more about what they're wanting to do. It's just keep on asking questions. And again, just like Matt had said, it's going to build rapport and make them feel more comfortable with you.
I like that. That's great. Thanks, Scott. Okay, so I read to
Hey,
me
Dan,
that,
I don't know if this goes into something different, but protection period for me has been like a sticking point with the changes. If I'm doing one property, a shortened time for the EBBA, are people shortening up that protection period, or how are you talking about that?
Anybody have any comments on that?
I haven't studied it at great length, but from what I gathered, if they sign an agreement after yours expires with somebody else, then any protection you have is gone. So my approach has been, well, if it's a specific property, I'm going to do it for a while. If it's abroad, you know, all of Utah or whatever, I'd be more inclined maybe to go short. But, you know, my concern would be that somebody would, you know, just use me to get in the door and then go try to, you know, shop an agent that will represent them for 1% or 0.5% or something, and then sign
Right.
with them. And then I'm, you know, I'm completely out. The exclusivity is completely useless. So
What's a while for you?
On a specific property, 2 or 3 months.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. At least 2 or 3 months on a specific property is kind of where my head is.
No, that's a great question. I think that's going to be something we're going to work through over the next little bit. I think protection periods probably haven't come into play that often because we've been signing EBBAs for 6 months or a year or whatever. And so we're probably their agent and we just work it out and whatever. But as we get into a new space, and if we do get into the habit or business practice of signing short EBBAs, you know, tracking that client and following that client, see if they're offering on properties you've shown them. I mean, that's going to be a headache. And then protection periods are going to matter more. So obviously, like the longer protection period you can get is better for you. And I think if you're specifically with a client and you're saying, hey, I'm only limiting to one or more, or 1 or 2 properties or one location or whatever, I think it's fair to ask for a longer protection period.
Well, I don't think it's the length of the protection period that needs to be longer on a specific property, because as soon as they sign with somebody else, it's gone.
Well, but there's also the unbroken chain of communication and events with the client to take into consideration. So it seems to me like it's on us to keep in touch with that client, make sure we're following up to the best of our ability. If we have that document signed through a certain point of time, I mean, because if we stop working with them and we just let them go by the wayside, they could sign with somebody else, and there could be a case for, you know, us just walking away and not reconnecting with them, right?
Yeah. So my point is just that the length of the agreement to show a single specific property, in my mind, I would want that to be for 2 or 3 months. That if I'm going to take you to see this house today, if you want to buy this specific house, this agreement is good for 2 or 3 months. The protection period, I think, matters a little bit less on that, because as soon as they go out and find a cheaper broker, you know, and want to do a workaround, if they're that savvy, right, and do a workaround, then that protection period does me no good if I've only had the EBBA good for 1 day and a protection period for 19 years. It does no good because they sign a new one now with somebody else and do the workaround.
And Haley, even in this market that's a little bit slower, where we have inventory that's a little bit higher, properties are still moving in 2 or 3 months. And so if the property hasn't, you know, the property most likely will sell, and then the protection period won't matter.
Yeah.
Kelly.
That's how I read it. I might be wrong. I don't know. It's all new.
Yeah.
So the way I'm understanding this, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's like the listing agreement now, that once they sign a new buyer broker agreement with a new buyer's agent, the protection period is lost because they owe a commission to a new buyer brokerage. Is,
That's right.
am I understanding that correctly? So it's like the listing agreement.
Yeah, I'm gonna chime in for 2 seconds. That you guys hear enough of me, so I'm gonna keep it to a minimum. That is correct, Kelly. It used to be just with the ERS, with the change they made to the EBB, that same protection is in there. You and Haley are absolutely right. So I would say it this way. If you want protection, then extend the initial period. Don't rely on the protection period. That only covers if they don't sign another buyer broker or another ERS.
Right, so we're referring to this section here. This is the new one. Section 3, right? Protection period. The last sentence is, unless the buyer is obligated to pay a brokerage fee on such an acquisition to another brokerage based on another buyer broker agreement entered into after the expiration or termination date of this EBBA, right? And so if this expires and then they get another EBBA, then, right, Matt? That's what we're saying. This is
so to clarify.
Yeah,
so to clarify, that really is, I mean, even though there's a section called the protection period, it's really not a protection period. And that last part that you read is once the initial term has expired. So the initial term really is your protection. So, and this was a trade-off in the buyer broker agreement, right? What the DRE didn't want to have happen was for Kelly Schulberg. I'm using this because it's ridiculous and she would never do this. Kelly Schulberg to go out and say, hey, sign up with me to work for a day and then have a 12-month protection period. And then a person's bound to her for 12 months for really not doing anything. That's why that unless is in there.
Okay, that's a good conversation. How about section 2? We went over section 1, some of the differences. Section 2, how is section 2 different now? I think kind of an obvious answer, it's very different, right? So some of the questions we've had come up on section 2 is when we set the amount that's due to the brokerage, we set the amount and the percentage, and our company standard is $295 plus a percentage. We give you lots of latitude to choose the percentage that works best for your business. But what happens if a seller is offering less than the percentage mark there in this EBBA? That's a question.
The buyer pays
the
it.
buyer would be responsible to make the payment.
Sorry, say it one more time, Kelly. Who's responsible?
The buyer.
The buyer. Okay. Haley, were you going to say something different?
No, just saying that.
Yeah, right. So the buyer is obligated to make that difference. So we've had this actually terminology in our EBBA for a long, long time. How many have collected the difference between what's offered from the seller to what the buyer brokerage agreement says? Meaning, if we have 3% here and the seller's offering 2.5%, how many have gone after the buyer for the extra 0.5%? Matt, you don't get to raise your hand because you've done 1,000 million transactions. Carrie Moss's hand is raised. Are you in a position to talk about it, Carrie?
I've done some.
Yes.
So just that you went after the difference?
Yes. And I just explained up front when we did our buyer brokerage. And in fact, I just did this Wednesday morning, first day with the changes. But I just explained, first of all, I just talked about how really this is exactly how it's always been on our buyer broker agency. But now with the changes, it's just broken out so that it's more transparent for how so the buyer understands more where the commission is coming from. But really when I explained that it was the same as it's always been, we're just being more specific, they were just like, oh, uh-huh. So that was a great way to explain that because it's really nothing has changed. It's just they understand more. But I've just said, that really the way I said it was that my standard commission is 3%, and that if the buyer if the seller was offering less concession than 3%, that I would discount down to 2.5, but that 2.5 was my base. And that if there was something below, so then they were like happy that I was giving them this discount from 3 to 2.5. And then, but if it went below 2.5, that the buyer would be responsible to make up that difference. And so through this year, I've had 3 times that that's happened, that my buyers have made up the difference up to the 2.5. And every time they felt great about it. We talked about writing it into the offer, discussed that for our offer circumstance, that it probably wouldn't go over well with the seller and might damage our offer. And so they opted to just have that amount of money be just added to their settlement statement at closing with the money that they would bring in for their purchase. And they were fine with it. And when it came on the settlement statement and I sent it to them for review, didn't say a thing about it, didn't say a thing at signing. I mean, I just think it really is the way you present yourself. You've presented your value, all that you're going to do for them. They feel great about your representation. They've been happy with you through the process, and they're happy to pay that amount to have had you help them through this really tough transaction that you just made so much easier for them.
What a pro. Way to go. That's fantastic. Way to set the table early on, have the discussions with your clients at the beginning of the transaction so that when it goes a little bit differently than you'd hoped, those objections are kind of easy to handle and work through. Nicely done. Union Park, is that you, Daryl?
Yeah, so I know we've talked about the new addendum and we've also talked about the escrow instructions form. In order for the title company to get this right and our office to get it right, what is the most appropriate documentation if you elect to, one, waive the 3% and drop it to 2.5, or not waive the reduction in commission and charge the full 3% and say that the buyer is going to make up the difference? There probably needs to be some instructions, and I'm not clear whether the escrow instructions has gone away or if we still have that form available.
Well, so two things I would say. One is we haven't had this conversation yet, but if you want to go down, it's really easy, and a simple addendum to your EBBA would be the appropriate way to do that. And so if you wanted to go from 3 to 2 or whatever number you'd want to put in there, then that's simple to do that. The same for going up. You know, one of the new things about this form is you can't accept more compensation than what is outlined here in section 2. So you'd want to make sure that if you want to take more, or if you plan to take more, if you're working with the seller and we might get in a position to be offered more, we want to make sure that prior to any contract, and this is key, prior to any contract, that the EBBA is modified appropriately. If you go under contract and it says 1% on your brokerage fee and they're offering 2%, you may not collect an additional percent as compensation for representing the client.
So one additional suggestion then, if you're going to do an addendum to your exclusive buyer broker agreement, based on this one transaction, you may want to specify that it's this one transaction, or else you're locking in that reduced rate for the next transaction if this one should fail.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, you really want to, especially if you're going down, right?
Right.
But protect, you know, your client's fiduciary, right? Like you'd want to make sure that this is, you know, any adjustments to this is property specific, or, you know, if it's not property specific, if it's, you know, you're willing to do 2% for a couple weeks, but if it goes on for several months, you know, we'd want the ability to modify that. You'd want to make that clear with your client. Okay. Lastly, a big change in section 2 here with bolded out, everybody's going to see it, is fully negotiable, right? Compensation has always been fully negotiable. I got a cousin in North Carolina, and I hate this guy. I love him, hate him, but he thought his agent strong-armed him into paying 3% to a buyer's agent, and you can't do it any other way. And And I, questioned if that's actually the language his buyer's agent or his seller's agent used. And 2, said, well, you got what you paid for because you bought a discount brokerage and you got bad advice, so that's your fault. But, compensations are negotiable. Other than that, there's not a whole lot different in this contract, right? And so really the differences we're talking is a little bit of a rearrangement on section 1, and then a little bit of specificity on section 2, and a clarification that you can't make more. And the question was asked, if I have 3%, let's say, on section 2, and the seller's offering 2%, do I need to modify my buyer broker? You do not need to modify it. That's the way we've always worked. And, if that's, confirm it with the settlement statement. If that's what you're making and that's what you're good with, then you don't need to modify it. That's not a rule to do that. Okay.
Hey, Dan, will you say that last part again?
If the buyer broker agreement says you're making 3%, let's just pick a number out of thin air, and the seller is offering 2% as compensation to the buyer's brokerage, you do not need to modify your EBBA. You can accept that 2%, and I would verify that number at settlement is correct, but there's not an obligation to modify the EBBA to get less than what the number is stated on section 2 for brokerage fee.
So the benefit of what Matt was showing us the other day about the clause to add the floor, I feel then if it's not a requirement to modify it, is just a nicer, softer sell perhaps for the buyer to say, hey, I've got 3% in here or 8%, but if we don't get 8, I'm willing to take 7.5, but I'm not willing to take any less than 7.5.
I mean, be the pro that Carrie is, right? Set the table early on in your discussions with your clients, right?
So that's a good way to help soften it for the buyer, to let them know, hey, I'm not going to hold you to this 8% if we can't get it, but I do have a floor at 7.5.
I like it. Okay. Let's go back to the slides. I want to go over something that we saw recently with one of our agents who's on here, and she can share her experience if she wants. I blocked out names, but yes, here we go. So working with buyers, there is a real estate brokerage compensation agreement, right? I think we beat this to death. There's a few clarifications that I wanted to make with the compensation agreement, in contemplation form. It is best practices to get this form done. It just is, right? In negotiations, if you are a fan of Chris Voss, he often talks about setting the floor, right? And so in this form, you can set where the commissions are supposed to start and mirror that in an offer. And so if you contact a seller and you say, hey, what compensation is the seller willing to offer? Or sorry, seller's agent, and the seller's agent says 2.5. Well, on your REPC, on your offer, you can mirror that and use that as the floor, or you can, and then you would have documentation that says, hey, you said you were offering 2.5, and that's a powerful way to negotiate. That's one benefit of the contemplation form. It also sets a baseline, so it sets that baseline for negotiations. It also establishes agency. So in section 3 of this form, it says, I'm a buyer's agent and I have the proper documentation to make me the buyer's agent. And then section 4, it says that the person on the other side is the seller's agent and that they have an ERS with their client that outlines probably the commission that they're willing to do. And so this is a form that helps, I think, it's not obligated. We don't have to get these forms, but I think it's best practice, and Matt certainly encourages it. Matt, do you want to do 30 seconds on it?
Yeah, sure. I covered this morning, did a team training down in Utah County, and this came up, and I used a simple cake analogy, right? And I'm going to just briefly rehearse it. First layer is a conversation with the agent. Right, you're going to call up, I'm interested in showing your property. You've got a qualified buyer. Are you offering a cooperative compensation? memorialize that in a text and an email to at least start the paper trail. Is that binding contractually? No, but it's the first layer of the cake. Second one is, and I use the example in my training, if you have any concern about getting paid, then use this form. I hear agents saying to me, asking the question, man, that sounds like a lot more paperwork. I got to get it signed. Well, that's true. And you're not forced to do it. And the company's not going to force you to do it. But if you don't have it, you're literally rolling the dice of whether you're going to get paid or not. Right. And furthermore, you maintain your negotiating position. So remember, in this agreement, it still hinges on. So you're going to your seller and you say, hey, you're going to sign this agreement saying on this particular buyer, if we accept a REPSI, right? If we accept a purchase contract, then this will be contractual and you will pay this percent. But you're still in control, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, because you get to look at the REPSI first before accepting it. And if we don't like it, like if the premise was, yeah, we told the buyer's agent that there was 3% commission based on a full price offer, and then we get a full price offer with $15,000 in concessions, then before I ever allow you to sign that as my client, we're going to go back to the other side and say, hey, that's not what we talked about. Send me over a new brokerage payment agreement that is 2.5%, 2%, whatever we negotiate, then sign the REPSI. Now you've got the stacks of the cake there. And the additional layer, the frosting is, if even at that point, if there's a difference between how much the seller's willing to pay versus what is in your buyer's broker agreement, you get two choices. Talk to the company and see if we're willing to eat it, if it's a small amount, or put the rest of it in the REPSI, right? Because those two agreements are additive. They add together.
Awesome.
Matt, isn't that the one though that says up to?
Up to is the exclusive right to sell.
Okay, so this one doesn't have any up to in it. So it's as obligating as kind of what we had with the MLS. Okay.
Yeah. If they sign this agreement and they accept a REPSI, the terms in this govern.
Hey, Matt.
Yeah.
Hey, Matt.
Dan. I had to fill out one of these compensation agreement forms because before the 17th, MLS was pulling listings that had any BBC on them. And so neither the seller's agent nor I had a copy of the listing handy. So we have to do a compensation agreement form to make that BBC or whatever we're calling it.
Let's call it now from now on and forever, cooperative compensation.
All right.
See, we just call it, since we're good with acronyms, just call it CC, cooperative compensation.
So anyway, that had to be done in order for us to be able to complete this transaction. Because the MLS pulled them off early, you might want to check your listings, everyone, to see if you're currently in one that's going to close and may have to make out a new one of these.
Yeah, and Daryl asked the question if escrow instructions have gone away. No, but realize what it is. It's just an agreement between two brokers, has nothing to do with the seller. So if I'm
the seller has on as well though. Or sorry, be on the compensation agreement form.
So let's just say barring a compensation agreement, barring negotiating it in the REPSI, if I as a listing broker send over to Don Patton a escrow instruction saying the brokerage agrees to pay, 2% or whatever the number is, yes, I'm as a good practice, I've got to make sure that it is congruent with my ERS and what's contained in section 2.2, and that the seller, accepts a REPSI, but basically escrow instructions are also contingent upon an accepted REPSI. But if the REPSI is accepted, then the brokerage is required to pay the other brokerage. The amount is in the brokerage escrow instructions. So it doesn't go away is what I'm trying to say. You have three vehicles, but you're going to see a lot less of the escrow instructions.
Okay, anyway, she'll have to watch it.
So and we got 10 minutes left. There's a few more things I want to hit on. So we're going to move on from this. But I did want to say there's an additional way to get compensation, right? Additional form we talked about is the real estate brokerage payment addendum. This came up yesterday with one of our agents. They had a signed addendum to the contract. And I can't remember who brought it up, but this is the in addition to, right? And so if there is a previously agreed to amount, set forth in the REPSI, the new REPSI that sets in an amount associated with the contract, this addendum would be in addition to. Now, this is done with a EXP seller's agent or brokerage, I should say. And so this was the amount that the buyer's agent was asking for, the total amount. And this was signed by everyone involved in the party. And you can see this is addendum 3 and addendum 5. We got this back from EXP. And so EXP had a little bit of a laundry list of what are really more disclosures than they are modifications to any terms of the contract. And so I don't know what this form says. I'm not an attorney. Our advice to our agent and our client was to not sign this because we were under contract at this previous number. So if this becomes EXP's new response to a commission request, we'll have to work through it. But this is the water we're starting to get into, and it's a little bit muddy, especially with some of the brokerages that they will not participate in broker-to-broker compensation.
Hey Dan, just interesting. You made the point that this is a disclosure. It's really not even contractual terms. It doesn't change anything that's in the even if this were accepted, EXP is not a signer to the contract. And all they're saying is EXP doesn't. So whatever the seller's relationship with the EXP, this is just a disclosure about that. It literally has no impact. I read the language, has no impact actually on the commissions agreed to or not agreed to. So it's kind of hilarious that they're pushing this out.
Yeah, it's a nothing burger. Technical term. Let's jump back real quick and talk about some seller stuff. So I had that initially. So working with sellers. We won't go over all the objections. Oh, Colleen, go ahead. Sorry.
I just wanted to mention all the office managers printed the MLS for agents that were under contract so that we would have a copy of any under contracts they had before the 14th, before it was taken off the MLS. So they could check with their office manager to see if they have a copy.
That's awesome, Colleen.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. That did jog my memory, or something I wanted to say is that all the ERSs and all the EBBAs that we have signed prior to August 17th need to be modified, or we need to redisclose, I should say. That's probably a better word. So there is in Sky Slopes, is it in Sky Slope, Matt? Maybe not yet.
Yeah, I'm hoping in the next 24 hours.
I mean, come on, dude. There's hardly any changes. Let's stay on top of things. No, but in the next 24 hours, it'll be in Sky Slope. Right now, it is on utahrealestate.com in the form section. And we do need to amend our ERSs and EBBAs to include the new verbiage that's really in Section 2. So both of those addendums are reiterating Section 2 for buyers and sellers.
Those are in Sky Slope already.
There you go.
I checked last night, so they must have just done it today. So
I couldn't find it this morning. Do you know what it's called?
I used them yesterday out of Sky Slope.
Okay, then.
Are you talking about the temporary ones?
The ERS addendum and the EBB addendum.
Yeah, they were in there yesterday.
Okay. Well, the new contracts are. I couldn't find the addendum. So the language that adds that modifies Section 2 for both contracts. Be that as it may. We need to amend our agreements with our clients. Go ahead, Matt.
What was the file name, Don? Because maybe that was the problem. I was searching on ERS addendum and it came up with all the.
Type in temporary.
There you go. Type in temporary.
Okay. Awesome. So we need to amend those agreements with our clients. And, as Matt said, we need to disclose to them. We can't require that they sign, but we do need to put it in front of them and let them know that there is modifications to Section 2 for both of those as a part of the settlement with NRA. So in working with sellers, look, it's really not that different. It just isn't, right? Section 2 of the ERS, it just breaks up the compensation. And it says, this is what you'll pay your seller's brokerage, and this is what you might offer up to a certain number with the buyer's brokerage, right? So question, what about, let's see, what about unrepresented buyers? Who gets compensated? Because in the old form, we had a big number, and then we offered a buyer's agent or a buyer's brokerage. And if there was no buyer's brokerage, then the seller's brokerage got the big number. So what about unrepresented buyers? Well, the answer is they do not have representation and aren't covered in either section of this new section number 2. So if you want compensation, then you might need to outline that with your client. And if you're a pro like Carrie, you might do that before the unrepresented buyer walks in, because that sets the table and allows you to do that seamlessly without a whole lot of heartburn. And so that's good practice to do. I've seen some people add language, which you might want to run by Matt, that says, in the event that I work with an unrepresented buyer, compensation to the sellers, or section 2.1, seller's brokerage fee shall be, instead of 2 or 2.5 or 3%, whatever that number, maybe you up it to 4 or 5 or whatever number might work for you and your business. Yeah, talk with your client. Consider an addendum for additional compensation for an unrepresented buyer. Now, what about dual agency? What if the buyer is not represented but wants you to represent them? Well, now you are the buyer's brokerage, right? So now the seller's brokerage and buyer brokerage is the same brokerage, and it's covered by section 2.1 and 2.2. And so the brokerage shall receive the entire amount. And so we're good to go there. There's no need to amend the ERS at that point. Let's talk a little bit about commission and buyer's brokerage and up to amount. I have a couple listings and I've scheduled a few showings, and I have not had a single buyer's agent call me and said, "Hey, Dan, what are the sellers paying on commission?" Are you guys making those calls? Have you received those calls? What are you saying?
I have an agent showing my listing today, and he's not called.
He hasn't called? Okay. Carrie?
Yep, I on that Wednesday morning got my new EBBA signed, and so we looked at homes that day, and I called each one of those agents and asked what they were offering on a buyer's agent compensation. And the one that we wrote an offer on said it was 2.5, and I wrote a 3%, and the seller accepted it as 3%. Da 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 da.
Very good. Well done. That's awesome. Good for you. I think a couple months ago, in contemplation of these changes, I was thinking that I might just be cagey with a buyer. Like, I don't know, it depends on the offer, right? But I was talking with one of the brokers at Mansell, and he said he was trying to get a hold of a buyer or a seller's agent and just figure out some details, and they were kind of cagey, and the client ended up just not even seeing the home. And his client, the Mansell's client, he was a guy that had a whole bunch of exchange money. They bought like 5 houses. They probably would have bought this guy's house. And I know who the agent is, and I'm so tempted to call the seller and let them know that the dereliction of duties led to them not selling their house, because we need crap agents out of here. But anyway, I think don't be cagey with this. Like, we still want to work with the buyer on the other side, and we need their agents to bring best offers to the table. And how do we get them? Well, we give them all the information we have. If it's 2 and you're like, it's 2, right? If it's 3, then awesome, bring your best offer. Whatever the case may be, we want to work with the other side, and we want to give them the best offer. And so let's not be cagey. Let's get people to the table and get the best deal we can for our clients. Do I need to amend any current ERSs that are not under contract? The answer is yes. We went over that. We do need to put addendums to our clients that modify section 2. Again, we want them signed. Hopefully our clients don't put up a fight, but we have to at least disclose to them. we went over kind of up to and best practices. Does anybody have anything that they want to add to that discussion as far as working with, from a seller's agent perspective, working with buyer's agents?
I think the only concern on that is people that are afraid that maybe we're breaching our fiduciary duty if, in fact, you know, the seller could get by with only paying 2%, but they're willing to go to 3%. You know, we don't want to be in trouble for saying, you know, too much and then having it come back on, you know, kind of on us. So do you have any thoughts about, you know, the best way to do that? So you're, you know, yeah, we want the deal and we want to work with people, but we also want the seller to have to pay as little as he can, right? That's our job. And to net as much money as he can. So I think there's some of the caginess maybe that's coming from that place of just trying to do the very best for your client, because we're legally obligated to do that.
Don and then Matt.
I don't have anything.
Oh, Matt.
So I had this morning in the training I was involved in, and it's a place we go frequently. But remember, money isn't only, I get it's a big part of it, and I'm not trying to ding that. Just remember, sometimes when we talk with our clients and find out what the real needs, time moving forward is sometimes more significant than price. So let's make sure we don't do our clients thinking and be cagey, thinking we know what their priority is. Let's make sure we're clear on what their priority is. And if somebody does, for instance, have a tight timeline, then we should proactively be having that discussion. Hey, in so many words, allow me to not be cagey. Allow me to disclose, right? And by the way, your ERS in its default form says you and the brokerage have the ability to communicate compensation based up to that amount. So there's no requirement in there that we be cagey. In fact, I would say you actually have explicit instructions or an implied duty otherwise based on the ERS. They've told you as the seller that you can, and therefore you should, I mean, that's what implied duties stipulates, share with anybody who's interested what the parameters are. You're not breaching your fiduciary of doing what's in the best interest of your client. In fact, you're living up to the agreement that was signed. So I want to make sure we're all clear about that, because we tend to munge this idea that and in a general sense, we do. We want to do what's best for them, and sometimes that is getting the best amount of money. But we also have a specific document with explicit instructions in it with implied duties. So let's follow those.
Daryl, did you have a comment?
Yeah, as we're discussing here, just to rewind a little bit, can it be misconstrued if we're calling ahead down our showing route to find out what the seller's commission offer is? Could it be misconstrued that we are shopping for the higher commissions to show those properties or show those in a more favorable light and be accused of steering our clients? Maybe the time to ask.
Look, your client, right, has signed an EBBA, and so they have obligations that they need to hold. And so so they need all of the information that's pertinent to the transaction. And so one of the key points of that would be, would your client owe additional money if they got interested in this home and were to make an offer, and the seller's only doing X% and they owe their agent Y%, you know, the delta, would that prohibit them from making, from following through with an offer? And so I think the information that a buyer would need in order to consider the property, the compensation offered, or the cooperative compensation offered by the seller, becomes extremely crucial to the whole picture.
Unless you already know that they can't pay the full amount and you have to find someone that will pay it for them.
I think the order of the day, though, is don't do their thinking for them. We present data and let them make the decision. And to your point, Daryl, of could we be accused? Yeah, but that'd be a hard thing to legally connect dots. you'd have to have a full-blown pattern and understand what the intent was. So just put into place good business practices, pass on, hey, this one meets the criteria. It doesn't have the cooperative compensation we agreed to. How do you want to proceed?
So I think we'll wrap there. I think this is, thank you everyone for jumping on. Hopefully this was helpful to you. I'm going to go back to something that Buffini started with, right? Is, in truth, not a whole lot will change with our day-to-day. We're going to disclose a little bit more. We're going to have a little bit more conversation with our clients. And frankly, that might just help our clients at the end of the day. It may be a good thing. So I don't think we should be intimidated with the forms. I think it kind of is what it is. And the easier we make them as far as explaining them to our clients, the easier they'll glom onto those changes, and they probably won't put up too many objections. So, and hopefully some of the language we talked about here and shared with what other people are doing, we'll be able to incorporate with our own language as we talk to our clients. So thanks all for jumping on. And next week we'll have another class. Daryl, what did we have what that exactly is going to be? Or Aaron, are you still on here? Do we know exactly what the next class is going to be?
Dan, it looks like we're going to be doing database management and the importance of that and how to get that ready, and then like a KV Core overview is what we have, but we can talk about it. So
the next few weeks, Aaron and I really want to focus on making KV Core work for you, right? And how to make KV Core drive business to you. And so one of the only way that it can work for you is if it is updated. So get in there, upload your clients, make sure that you have everybody in there, contact Erin or Taylor or her team, and they can help you get your clients uploaded in there. Hopefully I didn't offer something you didn't want offered.
Nope, that's great. I am happy to help. So reach out and we'll help you get that in there.
Because used properly, KV Core will create contact with your clients for you on your behalf, and it just really streamline a lot of the SOI work that is so important to making this business sustainable. And so it's a heavy lift initially, but once you have it done, there's ways to automate this and make this really help drive your business for you on your behalf. So that's what we really want the focus of this class to be. And so if you can work on KV Core, get your people in there. If you have questions, as you have questions, contact Erin and her team, and they'll help you. All right. We'll see you all next week.
Bye.